You may kick off.
Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar today. It's very exciting for us to be joined by all our panelists and talking to such a large and comprehensive group of attendees. We're hosting this webinar today together with Rescro, which is the official tourism, trade and investment promotion agency for Cape Town and the Western Cape. We've worked with Rescro a lot over the last year or two, presenting webinars on various topics, and it's always such a pleasure. So I'm Tracy van Beek. I'm from the Corporate Commercial Department of ENSafrica in Cape Town, and I'm joined by a group of lovely panelists. Firstly, we've got Monica Yule, who's the Chief Marketing Officer at Rescro. We've got Stefan Gota, who is a trade training specialist in the South African Tourism Office in Germany. We've got Esty Brandt, who works in our Dispute Resolution Department at ENSafrica. And we've got Lauren Salt, who works in our Employment Department at ENSafrica. So our topic today is tourism and hospitality in a vaccinated world. I think we're going to have lots of interest in this topic. It's certainly a hot topic, something at the top of everyone's minds at the moment. We're going to move through our panelists. We're going to be talking on various aspects of this topic, and we'll start with Monica, who's going to tell us a little bit about the impact that COVID has had on the tourism industry in the Western Cape, and what the recovery is currently looking like.
Thank you, Tracy. The usual process of sharing screen. There we are. So first of all, good afternoon to all the viewers from the very cloudy, wintry Cape Town. Cape Town never lets us go into summer without one last little bit of reminder of why we're happy to have the sun come back. So it is one of those days today. I guess you can't really start talking about tourism in a post-pandemic world until you've kind of done a little bit of a review again on, what it's been like. And I'm sure most people on this call have some vivid memory of what that was. So it goes without saying, I think, that the travel bans and lockdowns associated with this pandemic have been the most catastrophic event to ever happen to travel, not just tourism, but travel in general. The UNWTO estimates that the industry worldwide has lost close to $1.3 trillion in revenue and 100 million direct jobs that were impacted through all these various travel bans and lockdowns. And so, the restart has been slow, and South Africa, the same as pretty much every other country in the world, has eked out an existence through various movement restrictions throughout the waves, has eked out an existence from domestic tourism. And I think we've all learned valuable lessons around the merits of having domestic consumers interested in your own destinations. And I'm hoping that we will continue with those learnings into the future. What you see here on this slide is the domestic passenger recovery at Cape Town International. Our data goes until the end of August as a complete month. We will soon have September as a complete month, and we are sure that those numbers will look even better. What you basically see here, the blue bar is the pre-pandemic domestic numbers, the red bar is the pandemic numbers, and then the line is the recovery percentage. So you can see that we had a initial moderate recovery in December, and then of course went into our second wave and things were a little bit muted. Then we had another recovery between the waves in April, May, and that was the highest recovery in domestic that we've seen to date, which was at 60% of pre-pandemic levels, which is quite a good recovery. And then of course went into the third wave, and now are seeing quite a steep recovery gain going into our summer season. So quite encouraging numbers, and 60% of pre-pandemic levels is obviously quite a great result. On the international passenger numbers, obviously the number is not quite as positive. Again, bearing in mind that, the German market, as an example, only took us off their travel ban list towards the end of this period. So we anticipate that as the rest of the vaccinated world starts opening up, we will start seeing these numbers increase even more, including some of the great information that we're getting at the moment around demand from the UK just really soaring after us being removed from their red list just recently. So if you look at December 2020, again, massive spike in recovery in terms of the graph, but actually also only 26% of pre-pandemic levels. You can see it actually in that sort of gap between the blue bar and the red bar. And then fell steeply again in Jan, Feb, mostly because of the beta variant narrative that sort of took hold across the world in terms of variant that was present in South Africa. A lot of travel ceased then. And then we've seen a slow and gradual increase up to now, again, close to the 25% mark. And as mentioned, we're obviously now going into Northern Hemisphere high season. So we are quite confident that that recovery number will start to stabilize and increase even further from there. Maybe just as an aside, our Air Access team does a regular mailer on all of these statistics. So if anybody's interested in receiving this information on a regular basis, please just go to our website. There'll be a little button that you can click to get your get your details into our database. You can click all of the different teams at Wesgro that you'd like to hear from, and then you can receive this update on a regular basis. So these are just our top 15 international markets based on their movements through international airport. Namibia at the moment has got a 43% recovery, sitting at about 19,000 passengers in the first half of 2021. And of course, our sort of key source markets, Germany will start to increase now. US and UK and Netherlands have all taken us off their travel ban list. So you will anticipate that those numbers will start increasing. France has also been allowing us to travel for quite some time. So whilst the recovery was relatively low as at the end of June, as mentioned, we are going into our high season out of those markets. So we anticipate that recovery to start taking a greater pace relatively soon. This is your hotel occupancy, performance and recovery. So again, you can see December was a little bit of a spike here with the summer holiday season for the domestic market. And then going into the second wave, sort of dropped off quite steeply again. And again, now it's been quite a steady recovery. This is obviously the Easter holidays over here with a little bit of a decline now, but nowhere near as steep a decline as previously. So we're hoping that that will stabilize and start strengthening as we go forward. I think it bears also mentioning that the one sector that we really need to start recovering faster is corporate travel and our conference business in the province. That does very much sustain us throughout the year as a steady drumbeat of business into the hotels, and that's the part that is actually recovering substantially slower than leisure travel. So we are hopeful that those businesses that are on this call out there, please, meetings in person matter. Having those sales calls into the Western Cape, if you're based in other provinces of the country, those meetings really matter in person. And we'd love it if you could start arranging your conferences in person again as well. And then these are just the attractions. Again, similar spike. Of course, the summer holidays here, you can see that there was visitation there. Still a substantial gap in terms of recovery. We're only sitting at about 36% recovery at its peak. And then again, a smaller little peak here over Easter. But we are anticipating that as we go into the summer holidays, both domestically and internationally, that some of these attractions will recover even more strongly. Some interesting winners actually over the travel ban period. So there were a lot of experiences and attractions that perhaps historically hadn't had their moment in the sun, particularly in the domestic market, that have really benefited from domestic spend, from people that had historically perhaps not even known that these places exist. And we've highlighted them for ease of reference. We've highlighted them here for you. So you can see Kogelboek Nature Reserve. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to book accommodation there. It is really, really beautiful. But if you want to book there on a weekend, you better go 6 or 7 months in advance, because they're really, really popular and they are gaining in popularity, as you can see here. Harold Porter Botanical Garden in January, suddenly 200% of previous numbers. They're doing really well. And then also along the West Coast National Park. Of course, we had some beautiful flowers last year and this year. So I'm sure if you looked at September 2021 numbers, they would be equally as positive as these ones were. So it's not all doom and gloom. You know, your standard international tourism experiences like Robben Island, Table Mountain, Aerial Cableway, those sorts of things will need some group business as well as some international inbound business to start flourishing again. But your domestic experiences have really managed to do well from the domestic market, as you can see here. Just to kind of bring the bridge over to my colleague Stefan, just in terms of inbound tourism, you probably will know that Germany removed South Africa from its list of high-risk countries recently. Inbound travelers from Germany to South Africa still need a negative PCR test, and travelers to Germany also then need either that or a vaccine passport or a proof of recovery from infection. The EU has introduced a COVID-19 passport for all its citizens and residents. This also then allows fully vaccinated EU residents and visitors to travel through Europe, which is great. South Africa, as you might also all know, has recently introduced our own digitized vaccine certificate, and hopefully soon will also recognize vaccine status as an entry criteria. We are pushing for that, and we are hoping that that is only a couple of days away. And again, as I've mentioned in the previous slides, now that we are removed from the high risk list, we're hopeful that this trend will continue into the festive season, and we'll start seeing some swallows returning, some inbound leisure tourism returning, and friends and relatives being able to reconnect and at least celebrate the upcoming festive season together. So that is my little bit for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Monica. That's such a helpful overview. I think Julia has let the group know where to find the information if anyone's looking for it in particular. So Stefan, I thought maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what's happening in Germany in terms of vaccination policies and vaccination passports, maybe some of the surrounding countries. What are the protocols and procedures there at the moment?
First of all, good afternoon also from my side. It's autumn in Europe, it's autumn in Germany, and also a little bit cloudy. So we try our best now to promote our upcoming summer season in Cape Town, to bring all the Germans back to one of the most beautiful destinations then worldwide. And yes, as Monica said, as from mid of September, we did a big milestone. Not we, the German government did a big milestone with all the important stakeholders, because we've got a lot of requests asking us, you must do something, you have now to knock on the door of our foreign ministers, of the German foreign minister, and. So it was a quite complicated process because it starts with, of course, all our experts in South Africa, to the government, to the World Health Organization, to the European Union, back to the German officials, and. So then everybody can imagine how difficult the whole process was to put South Africa from this list. Unfortunately, first we had we were a destination of virus concerns. We had a lot of problems to convince Germans to travel to South Africa because of course, they could fly, but when they returned to Germany, they had to go into quarantine for 14 days. Without testing, and then so it was quite difficult to say then spend a holiday in South Africa for 14 days, but you have to book for 4 weeks to make this happen. So a lot of barriers, and then South Africa was then declared as a high-risk area, and also now in Germany there was a change in the consumer behavior. First of all, the people then they accept, or they learn to live now with the virus, and that was before. That was in the time where we start with the vaccination plan. We had a low number of vaccination rates in Germany, but also then still then the people they are interested for traveling worldwide. And also our tour operator, the German tour operators, they start selling then also then destinations that were on that high risk list. which was always a problem for them and also a problem for us. I'm sure all our colleagues or most of our colleagues in South Africa know that due to the common law or jurisdiction, the customer or the consumer could cancel his booking short term, with the result that the tour operator or the retail office has to pay back all the money. And that was the reason why all our industry partners get a lot of pressure from all sides to look into their terms and conditions and that. So this was the time where we had we were forced with these tremendous difficulties. And yeah, slowly as we managed it that as from 19th of September. With effective of that day, South Africa is no risk area anymore. With other words, there is no restriction from the German side traveling back to Germany. And when I say traveling back to Germany, again, our biggest obstacles in the past was the travel barriers in the country, in Germany, because in South Africa, since I think more than a year, PCR tests 72 hour, and so there was a consistency in the rules and regulations. And here in Germany, every let's say every week, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, there was a change in the regulations. So it was very difficult also for all our stakeholders to come up with a business plan, you know, and knowing that especially the tourism decision, it's a long-term process. You know, you don't book a day before you travel and you do these then let's say a minimum 4 weeks before, and then we had the situation that the consumer were afraid to travel because what happened if then the destination, for example, South Africa, was then declared again as high-risk area, and so the biggest challenge for the customer was question was, how do I get back into my country office and so thanks for that. This is gone. This is hopefully history. And we are very carefully watching the incident rates in South Africa, which looks fantastic. Also now the rate of vaccination rate is picking up. So all these will help us also then to build up trust to our retail and our tour operator side, that they now start selling South Africa again, because that was also maybe not known for some of the partners. As from 1st of September, for example, the major tour operators, they start accepting bookings. South Africa was still then on their websites, and you could ask for booking, but they didn't take the booking. Due to the fact, as I said, common law that the customer can claim back all the money, and so that was quite a very difficult situation for that. And as from September, then now feedback from tour operator, also from some of our industry partners. And I read the article from Monica. It was today in the press, that now the bookings are picking up. And thanks for that, a lot of German tour operators and also then other partners, they hold the bookings from previous months from last year. So, and also the consumers now then say, no, I want to travel. And so also the forward bookings, we don't have figures now, but it looks very positive. We all know it's a long time process. So I'm saying that we are now into the recovery, next year in the restart, and in 2023, I think that we are back into that. asked me about vaccination. It's quite a difficult situation, an interesting discussion. This is quite this week, because each and every country has different rules, different regulations, and there is a huge debate. What I've picked up from other countries, whether it's the Netherlands, whether it's Italy, Austria, and I think also UK, people who are not willing or who are very skeptical about the vaccine, and so also now what we have to have in mind, how much is the percentage of these type of people who are not accepting these the vaccine, and also then so the other question will be in future, how many people are vaccinated, people are doing in future? Are they only offering then trips to South Africa for people who are vaccinated or recovered from COVID-19, or then also are they offering also then these trips to if 60% of the people are vaccinated, the rest not. Are the others then also then accepted that within that group are people who are non-vaccinated? So a very emotional, and difficult discussion we have at the at the moment. And also there are some operators, tour operators now, also bigger ones, who offers only trips for people who are vaccinated and recovered, so this will be then our discussions we will have in future about these developments. So this is a short overview where we are coming from, where we are now, and also then the positive. I think the positive outlook is that a big milestone, picking up, and I'm very positive about 2022.
That's excellent to hear, Stefan. Thank you. I'm interested to know in Germany, what is the population used to over there at the moment? You have vaccination passports. Have you got QR codes similar to what we have? Can people enter restaurants and establishments freely, or are there requirements? Do you have to? What's happening on the ground in Germany at the moment? What are the German people used to?
Okay, so to give you a figure, actually currently 68.7% of the entire population are fully vaccinated. And now a lot of restrictions are going to be lifted, but again, what I mentioned before, now we have this discussion. If people are going into a cinema, or if they go to I don't know, to theater, to a restaurant, now are they only are they only allowed if they are fully vaccinated or then tested, and so also the same what I said before happens actually in country, at the moment, for example, all the discotheques, and they say no, only for these 2 Gs, we say the 2 Gs, that means vaccinated and recovered people, with the effect that they don't have to wear masks, that they don't have to hold distance, and all the bigger concerts. Also then, for example, if you go to a bigger football match, with 45,000 people, for example, they're now starting allowing these number of people only going to a stadium, but also a discussion there only for vaccinated, recovered. So what's going on with the tested at the moment? Yeah, if they are tested, they are also allowed. But since this week, the German government stopped the program to subsidize the testing. With other words, the customer or the people, they have to pay for the tests. which will cost them either from 15 euro to 45 euro, and also here now a big debate is going on. Does this now? Okay, the idea behind is to a little push the people who are not still not vaccinated to be, but again. There are still a number of people who are afraid of or don't want to get vaccinated. So these the current policy, does it work for them or not? So you see, quite difficult. Also on our side.
Yeah, it sounds like you're grappling with very similar things to what we're grappling with here. Monica, could you maybe just let us know from your perspective what you think needs to be done for tourism recovery to be successful in the Western Cape?
Sure. How much time you got? I think the most important thing is to certainly from Westgrow as a DMO perspective, I think there's two things that we need to make sure that happen. The first is that we want to make sure that we are demonstrably open for business. We want to expose travelers, but also the tourism industry, particularly in Germany, because this is the topic of today's call, that, you know, the experiences, the products are still beautiful and still working and still operational. And even in a COVID protocol world that we find ourselves in today, it's not invasive and it's not a negative experience. It's actually still there. And I think the Never Ending Tourist campaign, which is running in the German market at the moment, very clearly demonstrates how the Western Cape province is the place for wide open spaces and for natural social distancing and fresh air, and, you know, the best way to escape from a lockdown Europe. So I definitely think that, you know, enticing the consumer back and ensuring that not only the pent-up demand but also, you know, sustained demand happens, I think is really important. And then in collaboration with DDAT, with our Department of Economic Affairs and Tourism, we want to make sure that we also sustain the supply chain, that we make sure that those experiences, you know, remain open and remain wonderful. And, you know, one of the big challenges that we've got, we all talk about recovery. I always believe that as a business, it's easier to lock yourself down, and, you know, financially, it's substantially less expensive to lock yourself down than it is to then restart. And working capital is a real challenge for a lot of, especially the smaller businesses, as you start needing to provide that full service again, and yet perhaps don't have the cash reserves any longer. So together with our department, we are collaborating on interventions to make sure that businesses don't only survive the lockdown, but they actually also survive the restart.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something, I mean, we've certainly had many questions. I think something on the top of people's minds when it comes to vaccination is, how should employers really deal with these things? You know, what vaccination policies should employers have in place? And I thought, Lauren, could you maybe just give us an overview on some guidelines for some employers on vaccination policies in the workplace? I think you're going to have lots of questions on that topic.
Yeah, sure, Tracy. I could probably talk to you about this for the entire afternoon. So I'm really going to try and keep it short and simple and give you the whirlwind overview of vaccinations in the workplace. So what we saw earlier this year in June was a guideline that came out pursuant to the disaster management regulations. It's called the Consolidated Direction on Occupational Health and Safety in Certain Workplaces. It's a real mouthful, but I'm going to call it the Consolidated Direction. And attached to that was what we're calling the vaccination guidelines. So firstly, what the Consolidated Direction requires of every employer. So this is not just employers who are contemplating vaccination, but it requires every employer to undertake a risk assessment into their workplace and to see whether or not they want to, based on certain factors, implement mandatory vaccination. So regardless of whether you've decided that you are not going to implement mandatory vaccination in your workplace, you must have done this risk assessment. And what it then goes on to say is that you must, based on the nature of people's work and what they do, and because of their vulnerabilities, decide who a mandatory vaccination policy will apply to. So what we've seen coming out of this direction was at first a lot of hesitancy. Then some of the bigger corporates have come out and rubber stamped it, and the likes of Discovery has come out and said, we are taking a very robust view on mandatory vaccination, and all our employees must be vaccinated because they are all required to return to work. So there is certainly something that must underpin your mandatory vaccination policy that is justified by your risk assessment. And what that really means is there must be some sort of risk to your employees, either because they're vulnerable or because of what they do, that justifies making it mandatory for employees to implement this. Now, the first thing that everybody says, particularly the employees, is, what about my constitutional rights? I have the right to all sorts of things. And so the consolidated direction and the vaccination guidelines both recognize that the imposition of mandatory vaccination may infringe upon a person's constitutional rights. And they do identify certain grounds that employees may object to mandatory vaccination. And these two grounds are either constitutional grounds, and within the constitutional grounds, they recognize the right to religion, freedom of belief, and opinion, and they also then recognize the right to bodily integrity. So those are the two main constitutional grounds that employees could rely upon, and they also recognize medical grounds, and that really is where there could be a medical contraindication if you've either taken the first shot of the vaccination or if there is a known allergy to whatever components are contained in the vaccination. And so the question that's on a lot of employers' minds is, if I decide to do this, what happens if I have objecting employees? Now, really, there's two categories of objecting employees: those with legitimate objections or reasonable objections, and those where there's illegitimate objections and unreasonable objections. So in respect of the first category, where there's a reasonable objection, our view is that those objections would be those that are recognized by the consolidated direction and the guidelines. So where there is a legitimate religious belief, for instance, that the individual can't take the vaccination. Now, there's probably a bit of gray area there where, for instance, someone is a Catholic, the Pope has come out and said that all Catholics must vaccinate, but they hold a different view of certain religious texts upon which the Pope relied, or they have themselves received a message from a higher being not to vaccinate. So there may be some gray area as to whether or not any of those objections are reasonable. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got the unreasonable objections, which are, for instance, people who are claiming that they don't want to be spied upon by Russian spies if they take the Sputnik injection, or they don't want to be magnetic or 5G. There's a lot of fake news going around, these TikTok videos where people are sticking 5 Rand coins on their arm. So there's two separate processes that employers could then follow pursuant to whatever objection comes across their desk. So where you've got reasonable objections, the consolidated direction requires you to accommodate those employees. So in that regard, there's different kinds of accommodations that you could implement, but it must be reasonable to you and your business. So for instance, if you've got someone who is a pilot, for instance, flying the plane to Cape Town, you can't say that the reasonable accommodation of that person would be to work remotely. They can't fly the plane from home. There's other things that you could do where you could put that person in a different job. There's other things that you could do with different PPE. So you could require more social distancing, additional PPE in respect of those people that you're required to accommodate. But if you can't accommodate those people, so there's no reasonable accommodation that exists, then you would be obliged, or you would be entitled to terminate those employees' services. So in our example of the reasonable accommodation, you would likely go down an incapacity route because they're unable to perform their duty because of being unvaccinated. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, with the people who don't have a reasonable objection, that's likely to fall within the realm of misconduct. So you might be able to discipline that employee and ultimately terminate their services if it is a lawful and reasonable instruction to be vaccinated, and they either blankly refuse on ridiculous grounds, or they fail to do it within whatever time period you require of your employees. So that really is the whirlwind of vaccination guidelines in the employment context, but it does then go broader than just you and your workforce. And I know that Esti's going to jump in soon, and she's going to talk about what happens if you have public that come into your workplace. And that's certainly, just from an employment context, something that you would take into account for your risk assessment. and your approach to vaccination in respect of other people might impact your justifiability in respect of your own employees. So if you are saying, I am implementing mandatory vaccination because I am trying to make a healthy and safe work environment in terms of my occupational health and safety obligations, is that then diluted because you've got only 10% of your employees who are in your broader workplace? The remainder is people from the general public. So those are the sorts of considerations that you would have to take into account when deciding whether or not to implement mandatory vaccination. It is a really complex topic, and it's certainly not as easy as we've tried to distill it into these 10 minutes or so, but certainly I would strongly encourage employers out there to jump on the same bandwagon as the likes of some of the big corporates out there, particularly in circumstances where I think it's probably going to become a strong marketing tool for employers to try and get people to buy their services.
Yeah, Lauren, I mean, I was thinking a question that certainly crossed our desks is whether an employer can require prospective employees or applicants or even their own employees to disclose their vaccination status. I presume that that's something you can do based on what you've said.
Absolutely. So it certainly is something that you can ask the question, whether that information you can require or compel someone to then disclose it if they refuse is a different question. If someone doesn't want to tell you, they don't want to tell you. And then the question is, what do you do then? So the tricky thing might be is if you impose mandatory vaccination in your workplace and you put out an advert that says, I'm only hiring vaccinated people, whether or not that amounts to discrimination in terms of the Employment Equity Act. And it might very well do so if you do it up front. So what we're telling employers at the moment is if you are wanting to hire vaccinated people, to put out your adverts, get prospective candidates, pull them in, and then assess whether or not, if they aren't vaccinated, you can reasonably accommodate them. And if you can't, because of the very nature of the job that they will be hired to do, then you would be justified in not accepting them into employment. But it mustn't be an upfront deciding factor before you've even assessed the candidate's viability for the position. So in that circumstance, I think you can justify discrimination on that basis.
Okay, cool. Esty, are you going to tell us a little bit about, Lauren's obviously touched on the requirement for employees to be vaccinated and whether that's possible. When we've got restaurants, we've got establishments who have patrons and customers and clients coming in, we may have similar arguments. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Tracy, yes, thank you. So we've had to look at situations where people are saying, you're discriminating against me on the basis of me not being vaccinated. And the Constitution does protect people against unfair discrimination. And there's an inquiry to be made as to whether
Or have we lost Esty?
Discrimination Act.
Sorry, we lost you briefly. Esty, would you mind rewinding a little bit?
Yes, where can I rewind to? Sorry, I've had some connection issues.
The beginning.
The beginning. Okay, I was saying that people have been saying that their rights to equality has been infringed if they are being treated differently on the basis of their vaccinated status or not. And the Constitution actually does protect your right to not to be unfairly discriminated against. So there's an inquiry to be made as to not whether you. There are a number of factors to be taken into account. So there's a statute that has been passed. Lauren was saying that the guideline is a mouthful. The act is also a mouthful. The Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act. But let's just call it the Equality Act. And the Equality Act sets out a two-stage inquiry process as to ascertain whether someone has been unfairly discriminated. So the first thing you'll look is this discrimination based on one of the listed grounds? And the listed grounds would include, for example, religion, belief, sex, gender, and a number of grounds, but vaccination is not one of the grounds that is listed. But as Lauren said, look, this is a bit of a grey area. So belief, conscience, religion, that's also included. So it could be that, you know, you are discriminating against someone on one of the listed grounds, but that's not where the inquiry ends. So you have to look further and say, well, what is the context of this discrimination? And obviously, and that's an interesting, thing to look at, because it's not a bilateral inquiry. It's not between, you know, I'm the owner of a restaurant and I don't want someone who's unvaccinated to come into my premises. You actually have an obligation towards your patrons, your other patrons, and your employees. So it's a multilateral inquiry that you have to do as to what is the purpose that you're trying to achieve. And is the discrimination, whether it be a policy or any other guideline that you've issued, does it actually achieve what we're setting out to achieve? And I think most importantly, is there any other way that I can accommodate an unvaccinated person, or how I can to achieve what I'm trying to achieve in a less discriminatory up of different rights against each other.
Thanks, Es. We've had a couple of questions come in. I thought one firstly maybe for Monica.
I think that was the one about
Exactly, on PCRs.
Tracy's question on PCR.
Any updates if PCR tests will fall away soon?
So here are the facts as we have them before us today. We have at provincial level put together a position paper which was asked of us by National around this. I think that that I'm going to take that as a very encouraging sign that this is being contemplated. I also know that the UK government actually assisted our health department in the design of the QR code of our local digitized vaccination certification, which I again take as an encouraging sign that this is intended for use for travel relatively soon. And so I would definitely anticipate that it is currently being contemplated by government, not only in terms of its usage for travel, but also for its usage for access potentially. I don't know if anyone picked this up. It's interesting, it didn't make the media, but in Cyril Ramaphosa's last family meeting, he was speaking about the fact that getting vaccinated could potentially open up experiences and open up things that were previously not permitted during the lockdown regulations, which I found very noteworthy and very interesting as a statement for him to make. And so I would anticipate that over a period, potentially you would allow private businesses that are able to de-risk themselves through vaccine status tracking, that you could potentially start contemplating some things that were historically not allowed. I think the most important thing that we need to still get right is have our national government consider vaccine status of arriving tourists as an entry requirement. I do find it quite interesting again that the UK was quite strongly criticised for, not recognising the vaccine status of all of these different countries that were still on the red list. Yet, our national government at this point in time doesn't recognise anybody's vaccination status, not even its own citizens' vaccination status for anything. And so we are hopeful that that is something that will relatively soon find its way into the COGTA regs, so that it becomes something that we can actually utilize not only for our own citizens, but also to make travel easier. And then just because we like having things be hard in tourism, the next project that we're embarking on is to make sure that we can potentially harmonize those requirements with other SADC countries, because at the moment you can appreciate an international traveler that comes to South Africa very often doesn't only visit South Africa, they also do Zim, Vic Falls, Okavango Delta potentially. And so if you're wanting to do 3 countries in the Southern African hemisphere on a holiday, that's 6 PCR tests per person, which I'm sure you can appreciate is quite expensive. And so, you know, harmonizing those requirements with our neighboring countries, and also having them recognize vaccine status as a permission to entry, is obviously high on the list of things that we want to do. Thanks, Tracy.
Great. We have 2 other questions, which I think are for Lauren. The first one is, what about those staff who are vaccinated but feel unsafe of having an unvaccinated employee being allowed to enter the workplace? What rights are afforded to the vaccinated staff?
So this is something that's been happening a lot, where vaccinated staff are withholding their service and they're seeking to rely on the consolidated direction in doing so. So just some background there is what the consolidated direction permits is an employee to refuse to work in circumstances where they feel that there is a risk of them contracting or a serious and severe risk of them contracting the COVID-19 virus. So firstly, that consolidated direction provision only caters for situations where you think you are going to contract the virus. So for instance, if someone is unvaccinated in the workplace, is not presenting with any symptoms, you can't then on that basis say, because that person is unvaccinated, it's more likely that I'm going to contract COVID, notwithstanding the fact that I'm vaccinated because of their viral load or whatever the case is, and I'm going to stay at home. Sorry, I'm not coming to work. So in those circumstances, you could not rely on that provision. If, however, the person was sniffling and you know that they had come into contact with someone who had COVID, it's all over their Facebook or whatever the case is, then you would be justified in withholding your labor. And what the consolidated direction says is that you can't be terminated for that reason, and you can't be disciplined for that reason either. So in those circumstances, you would have that right if the unvaccinated person was presenting with any symptoms, or you had other information that you knew that they'd come into contact with the virus. But the risk is that if you withhold your service just because that person is unvaccinated, that your employer then takes disciplinary action against you and would be entitled to in that instance. Obviously, your employer sits with the ultimate obligation to make the workplace a healthy and safe environment for you as employees, but that does not necessarily extend to requiring everybody to be vaccinated. So if, for instance, there are unvaccinated people in the workplace, there are additional measures that are put in place, then you wouldn't be justified in withholding your service because your employer has, for instance, breached their occupational health and safety obligations.
Okay. And then the next question was, why make it mandatory for recovered people with natural immunity who do not need to be vaccinated? It could be more harmful to the recovered person with antibodies. I suppose that's partly a medical question, but
it is partly a medical question, Tracy, and it's something that we're also seeing. Obviously, a number of employers have started rolling out their mandatory vaccination programs, and they are in the process of, for instance, receiving objections. And this is an objection that does come up often. And it is something that I understand the underpinning science does suggest that that person does have natural immunity, and then on that basis is as good as a vaccinated person. So on that basis, you are seeing employers making accommodations for those people who do have natural immunity, and they are allowing them, for instance, entry into the workplace for that period of natural immunity. Obviously, once that period of natural immunity has elapsed, then that question then becomes, does that person have to vaccinate? And in terms of the employer's policy, the answer will obviously be yes.
Great, thanks. Stefan, I think, we obviously want the tourists to flow back into the Western Cape. We wanted to get busy again. Do you have any kind of final tips for us on how to make the Western Cape exciting and interesting, and for tourists, how to get them back here?
That's an interesting question. No, I mean, the Western Cape, especially Cape Town, is one of our drawing cards, and especially now with this whole restart process, we will play a lot around our mountain, the Table Mountain, and because when you ask first timers as well as repeaters, Cape Town is top of mind. My question is more around how do we reach the customers in the future? And there's a big change, or there is a change in the consumer behavior. We know that from the past, internet was strong, but nowadays after COVID, it becomes much more stronger. And so the question now is for us marketers, how we position ourselves, or where do we position ourselves in that whole landscape, in that whole area. So we know that first of all, or the Germans, for example, when they start holiday, they start their holiday with the planning. So the plan starts in the internet. So here it's a big challenge for us how we link now the various partners together. We know from some researchers now, and that's the pity, that's the difficulty with the internet. Within 10 seconds, you have to attract the customer. Otherwise, he's gone. And so on and so on. So this will be one of our focus in the future, how we bring more and more than the partners together on one platform that we can link to, for example, to the various sides of our product partners in South Africa, to the product side of Vescro, and also then we have to guide them through, or try to guide them through the whole decision-making process, because on the other hand, still a lot of people are using now the retail trade to get the first-hand information. And that was a statistic from last year that says that 80% of the customer actually decides their holiday also when they visit a retail trade. So the classical trade, the new things, this we have to come together. And yeah, I mean, I think we have everything. The biggest question I have, and that was, we call in German ein Luxusproblem, a luxury problem, a problem, sorry, is we have to avoid over-tourism. This is that was let's say 3 years ago, can't remember, but 3 years ago there was also then Cape Town on that list of destinations then with the problem of over-tourism. With other words, if you are then in the waterfront, and three cruise ships will then also be the same site in Cape Town, and so this will be a major question also in future, how we will balance this. At the moment, I mean, we have we deal with then the city, the Table Mountain, the two oceans, the people of South Africa, the Capetonians. This is also very much very important, because the German, they want to immerse with the locals, and especially these type of tourists we are targeting are really individual ones who really wants to come together, meet with the locals, and here we have to build up our whole industry. And yeah, I think now we have to see whether the restaurants are still all the restaurants open in the waterfront area, and I mean, Monica also mentioned this a little bit in her presentation. So here we have to see to identify the right products. And I must say our industry was very creative, innovative. A lot of other destinations of our competitors, they always come to us and ask, wow, what is happening in your country? So many ideas, fresh ideas, new ideas, and to attract the people. And so we have a fantastic industry with fantastic people coming up with a lot of interesting ideas, whether it's in the townships, whether it's in the wine area, whether it's in the garden roots area, with all the different things to do. So this is important. Also then, as I said, Cape Town, important first-time visitors as well as repeaters. We have a very high repeater quote. So here's the question, how we attract these repeaters. And we know that repeaters may primarily book a flight and maybe then a car, and the rest they do it then in country. So also then this will be then a challenge for us to build up the infrastructure in South Africa, that the people get all the information in their hand. But also then the classical trade, it's still of importance. As I said, 80% of the first timers, they use a retail agency for further information. Next to the individual traffic, there will be still group traveling of importance. We have now this discussion about sustainability, bigger groups, and here my gut feeling is that latest in 2023, we will have again the same situation, that also the groups are coming back, the bigger groups are coming back, and here we have to be always very careful about our price situation, about our pricing. Because also worldwide now we have a tremendous increase in prices when it comes to fuel, when it comes to electricity, and the inflation rate in Germany so far is above 4%. So we will have disposable income for the people to travel to destination that means to South Africa. And also discussion there is now the people, they have a lot of money they want to spend. Yes, because during COVID, they actually it was very hard to spend money because everything was closed. And now, of course, now the people want to spend this money, but they can only spend it once, you know. So as from next year on, as from let's say 2023, and also with the inflation rate, disposable income will be less. We will have again then a very price competitive market. So this is a little bit an overview, an outlook about the general then situation. But yeah, I mean, Western Cape, again, the industry is so innovative. I think we have to ask now Monica about the future plans.
I wanted to ask you, Stefan, I think something that's really stood out for me is just marketing the Western Cape as in a positive way for everything that we have to offer, as opposed to focusing too heavily on the COVID. You know, we've obviously got to make sure that that our establishments are safe, that we have protocols in place. But as you say, to make the focus on what we really do have to offer as a really beautiful and magnificent destination, as opposed to focusing on the negatives. There's actually another question for you, Stefan, specifically. Do you think that German tourists would choose not to stay in or eat at an establishment where the staff are not all vaccinated, or is that not really a deciding factor?
So far, difficult to answer. As I said at the beginning, the people now learned to live with the virus. That's very important. And my gut feeling is that they have trust in the vaccination. So if the protocols are in place, if, for example, the service, if the people in the service are tested, for example, then I don't see a tremendous, a big problem. But now we have to follow up this whole situation. What is the industry, the German industry is doing? As I said, are they only offering these then trips only for people who are vaccinated or then recovered, and so here we have to see. Also for me important is it's important to have this discussion about vaccination, about the protocols, and then. But we are dreaming, we are selling, we are promoting dreams, we are promoting a holiday, and then the people want to get out of their normal day life. So we have to be a little bit careful how we do this communication. We must do this communication within the professionals, as I said, always also then to say now that the facts are in place, also then that the vaccination rate in SA gets up, protocols are in place according to World Health Organization standard. As again, World, European Union, Germany, and then that all helps us. Then that South Africa will not come again onto this red list. We all want to avoid this, but we never know about the third wave, fifth wave, and then so long-term planning is then here then essential. And also another stat says that people are also then accept the protocols if they know in advance what they expect. So I say one of our tasks in Germany would be to educate our German tourists in this way, in a nice way to explain. Listen, if you travel to South Africa, and then I'm sure you know these travel safe logo created by TPCSA and the industry, and then this is important that we spread out this message to the client. Additional trust with our tour operator when they say, well, if you travel with me, then if with us, then all our product partners are then tested according to these protocols, and then. So this on that side we do a lot.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for all of your participation. Thank you so much to our panelists. You've been great. I hope that this session has been helpful to all the attendees. Thank you so much for your attendance. We've had a great turnout today. Thank you to Wesgro, always fantastic working with you. Thank you to Stefan so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure. I hope that this has been helpful and we managed to answer most of the questions. So I think we're going to end off there. Thank you everyone very much and stay safe. Until next time.